Settled. So I'm joined by a very illustrious group of individuals from George Washington University, and instead of me bumbling through introductions, why don't we go down the line here and introduce ourselves. So I'm Nikki Jones from Macmillan.
Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexia Stefanovich. I'm a senior at George Washington University, majoring in economics and minoring in international affairs and human services and social justice. And I actually attended another economics teaching conference with Professor Foster in May, so I'm really excited to be back here again. I'm really thankful that she wanted to have me back so I can continue learning from all of you, and I'm really excited for this panel. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Irene Foster from the Department of Economics at George Washington University, and really glad to be here.
My name is McKenna Burelle, and I'm a junior at the George Washington University, and I'm a double major in international affairs and economics.
Okay, so when we started talking about putting this panel together, it was important for us to try to figure out how we could really inject the student perspective into this conference and it really into this whole conversation, because after all, you know, what are we here for, right? We're here for the students. So to help sort of frame the discussion, Professor Foster, would you mind sort of explaining to the group sort of what economics education is like at GW and why you feel it's important to have multiple on-ramps to the microeconomics course?
All right. GW is in the middle of Washington, D.C., and we have a lot of students who come to GW to study political science, international affairs, and so economics is a required course for all of those schools. So we have students from international affairs, from the business school, from public health, and others who are systems engineers are taking it as an elective. So we have just a wide, diverse group of students coming in to take economics. We are the largest gateway course. Each fall, we have something like 1,500 students who come in to take economics, and our challenge is how do we teach all of those students adequately if they're coming in with different levels of preparation, from different types of schools, from different types of backgrounds. And as Betsy pointed out in her presentation, we're now seeing transgender. I'm sure they were always there, but now they are openly there in the classroom, dealing with transgender students, first-generation students, of whom we're seeing more in the classroom, et cetera. I should add that because we are the largest gateway course, we also have the largest percentage of Ds, Fs, and Ws, withdrawals, Fs, and Ds. So we are always under constant scrutiny by the admissions office and the Office of Retention. And so we also track those numbers very carefully, and we have to worry about how we're teaching our students.
So follow-up question. You mentioned that you're the largest gateway course, right? Second most popular major on campus. So how do you contend with, you know, these students that have different backgrounds and different levels of preparation? How do you sort of get them on the same page? What are some of the strategies you're enacting?
It's been a real challenge for us because it's been extremely hard to teach principles of micro and macro at the level that we want to teach it at, given that students are coming in so differently prepared. Some of the things that we've done, and I've spoken about this at different conferences, is to do an assessment. And I think Marcy talked about this as well, about doing a formative assessment, and so that's what we do. As soon as they're admitted to GW, they are asked to do a placement exam to come into economics, and so that letter goes out to them in April, and they have all summer to work on it. They have 4 tries at this placement exam. It's a math placement exam. And in between each try, the online system gives them remedial materials. So many of them who are motivated and who have to get a minimum score to get into microeconomics are working all summer, and therefore they come in prepared. And then they're ready to take a micro. There's some issue with students cheating because they are taking it on their own. So some of them are using calculators to take that test, even though it tells them not to. Some of them are having older sisters, and they'll just tell us when they show up. You know, I had my sister take the test or something like that, so that's how we know. So we thought, we need to do some other kind of test when they come in. And so we also tell them, once Blackboard is open and once we can reach all of them, we tell them, well, first week of classes, we're going to have a 20-question math assessment. And we do that as it's an open response assessment, and it's without a calculator because we really want to know what they know and what they don't know. So we give them that second assessment, and over Labor Day weekend, our TAs are grading it fast and furiously, and we collect the data by question. So we have some really good information. First week of the semester, we know people who got very high scores on Alex, but couldn't even score a 2 on our math placement exam. And we let them know that. We say our test tells us that you're unprepared for this course. We do have another course for you. It's called Principles of Mathematics for Economics. And so we move them into that safety net course, but we let that be their choice. And so we say, talk to your parents, talk to your advisor, and then decide what you'd like to do with that. And then we tell some students, you're fine, you're good to go into micro. We have been able, teaching microeconomics has now become so much easier. The faculty are able to teach it at the level that they want. If students have simple questions about math, etc., we don't deal with it in microeconomics because we have a class for them.
Mm-hmm. So much to respond there, creating this safety net course, as you mentioned. I'm curious, though, because I'm just putting myself in the student shoes, and Alexia and McKenna, I want to get your perspective on this as well. So if you're told, okay, you didn't perform well, right, on the placement test, how do you then help boost the students' confidence? And Alexia, McKenna, do you want to respond to that? And I know that you both are learning assistants, and you work with Dr. Foster in her classes. Can you speak a bit about some of the strategies that you employ when you're sort of helping students that are in this Principles of Mathematics course improve their confidence, improve their study skills?
So one of the challenges we found to students in the course actually is, in addition to their general math ability, it is a lack of confidence. And when they come in, we start to see language like, I just can't do it, I don't get it, I'm not a math person, I'm not good at this. And so as learning assistants and as supporters in the actual classroom, it's identifying those students, and we host our own study hours. They're 2 hours every single week. And they're at the same time every day, so students have the ability to come. If one day doesn't work for them, they can come to another day. And we're always there offering that support also in addition to the classroom. And it's a lot of encouraging them and saying, no, I just watched you do a problem. Like, you can do it. I just saw you do it. You know what you're doing. So it's fostering that encouragement that maybe they've never received before, or just created a mental block in their head, like, I can't do math, therefore I'm going to be bad at this. And it's changing that, like, maybe you couldn't do math, or maybe you didn't do well in the math assessment, but I'm watching you do problems and I'm helping you through them, and I see that you're getting it. So let's work through that.
And is it powerful, McKenna, for you as a fellow student to sort of be there with them? Can you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. It's really cool to work with your peers and help them work through problems that you struggled with yourself when you were in their position. So it's nice now that I'm further along in economics, and I can use what I've learned to engage with students that are younger than me and really help them appreciate economics and maybe help them decide to one day major in it as well. Because a lot of the students that we see right now are not currently economics majors or aren't really interested in that. So this course is really a gateway for them to dip their feet into economics and really discover their passion for it.
Which I think is really important work. I mean, pursuant to some of the statistics that we saw earlier in Betsy's talk, right, around how degrees are trending in terms of what students are majoring in by demographic. I mean, this is vital, right, the work that you're doing. So, Dr. Foster, I know that you take a very data-driven approach to the work that you do at GW, and you've been tracking students as they progress through the curriculum for, 4 years, I think? Longer.
Since 2011.
Okay, longer. Can you share a bit about the rigor and the approach that you take there?
I have some data that I wanted to show you on what we've been seeing in general. And you can see that the math is just one of the problems when we're talking about diversity and inclusion. But I just wanted to touch on the math. And then I wanted to talk about the other things a little bit later. But you can see the data we've been tracking when we do our math assessment for our students. we see that with the remediation and everything, about 85% of our students are able to get through it. But every year, the data shows us, there's about 11 to 15% of our students that even the remediation, the brush up that we give them, just doesn't help us. They don't know the basic mathematics. And we cannot teach it to them in a few days or a few hours. They literally need a full course to learn how to do the mathematics. So these are the numbers, and if you think about a cohort coming in of about 1,500 students, 11 to 15% of that number is a big number for the university. What do we do with these students who all have to take economics and who are just unprepared to take it? So our assumption is that they're prepared, but they're not. Something interesting happened. In 2014, the president of the university, at the time it was President Knapp at GW, was invited to the White House to a summit on access and success by President Obama. And at the meeting with other university presidents, he made big commitments and said, GW is going to do a lot. We're going to offer a lot of access to students who don't have access to college, et cetera, et cetera. And I wanted to show you what happened to the data after that happened. So here's President Knapp. This is from GW's in-house instrument there, GW Today. And he goes to this summit on access and success, says we're going to do something. They come back. They have a task force on access and success. The Board of Trustees sets it up. And then they decide they're going to do a number of things. So what exactly were they going to do? First thing they decided to do was to go test optional. So the decision was made between 2014 and 2015, and fall of 2016 was when GW went fully test optional. And for those of you who may not have heard that term before, that means we decided we weren't going to look at SATs and ACTs and all of those scores in admitting students to GW. We would look at their GPA, high school GPA, and other things, extracurricular activities and other things they had been involved in. So we decided to go test optional. As soon as we went test optional, the number of applications just jumped by about 30% that year for GW. And then when we looked at who we actually admitted, in fact, it did work. We became a more diverse freshman class. And you can see that the number of unrepresented minorities jumped by about 33%, big increase. And so it in fact worked, and here are some of the numbers. You can see underrepresented students, I'm going to stand up because I can't see that. Right. Underrepresented students jumped by about 20% of the freshman class. We saw 84% more African American freshmen coming in. We saw Hispanic enrollment significantly increase, about 11%. First generation college students increased by about 14% when we went test optional. And then the number of full-time freshmen receiving Pell Grants, big jump, so had a significant impact on admissions, who was in there. And the economics department, we like collecting data, so as usual, we were collecting our data. None of the other departments on campus really collect data the way we do, but here are our numbers. And you can see the number of students who failed our math assessment, couldn't show mastery on Algebra 1 type topics. And we're not asking them about random Algebra 1. We're asking them only about the Algebra 1 they're going to use in Principles of Economics. That number doubled, and it was about 30%. So huge problem, and this is when we had designed this course, our safety net course for students who weren't prepared. 2 years earlier, the department had designed this course, and we had asked the provost's office whether they would fund it, and they said no. So all of a sudden, spring of 2016, I get a call from the provost's office, and they say, remember that course you said you wanted to offer? And so fall of 2016 was the first time we offered that course.
That's great. That's great perspective, and thank you for level setting and sort of sharing this story. And so many key things to pick up on there, which is sort of this desire to widen the tent, if you will, and bring in more types of students, more diverse students. But then you had some implications, some things that happened as a result. And a part of this is, again, coming back to engagement. It's like, how do we reach students that are different from us? And so I'm curious, as you sort of embarked on this journey, and really this question is for all of us, or all of you, were you thinking solely about the principles, the gateway course, right? Or were you thinking more broadly about economics majors, how to create more economics majors out of this now diverse group of students?
At the time, the only thing we were thinking about was the principles course.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, and
our worry.
I appreciate the honesty. So for Alexia and McKenna, you both are economics majors. I'm curious, how did you decide to become an econ major? What was that decision-making process like?
So I started out as an IA major, and econ was one of the fundamental courses that I was required to take. And I started out in micro, and I didn't really find my passion there, but I was lucky enough to have Professor Foster as my macro course. And what I really liked that she did was every lecture she would tie what we were learning into something in the real world. And one thing in particular that we did that semester was she had us watch Ben Bernanke explain the global financial crisis of 2008. And actually tested us on the lecture. But I thought that was a really powerful tool that she used because it allowed all of us to listen to him, and we could actually understand what he was talking about, which was really cool. And understanding those lectures really helped me find my passion in economics. And I think her class, along with finding the blend of international affairs and economics and how economics approaches international problems like development and environmental sustainability, really set me down the economics pathway.
Yeah, I actually had a very similar experience to McKenna. I moved around a lot as a child, so I came in to GW thinking I wanted to do something very internationally focused, maybe politics, and then I started off with international affairs, and I didn't really know what was missing, but the classes just weren't clicking with me. I could tell that I wasn't as excited as my classmates were, I wasn't participating as much as they were, and then sophomore year, like McKenna, I took econ as a requirement, and Professor Foster was my professor, and I just loved it. I got so excited always to be doing my homework. My friends would laugh at me. They were like, there goes Lexi again, excited to be studying for a test. But it was just I found something that made me passionate, that I could connect with, something that I was excited to go to class and learn more about and see how it applied to the real world. And as McKenna said, Professor Foster tied a lot of examples in, and I still didn't really know what I was doing. And then junior year, middle of college, I had kind of a mid-college crisis. And I went to her office because she was my favorite teacher to that point and still is. And I said, Professor Foster, I'm really passionate about econ. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm an IA major. I think I'm going to minor in it. And she looked at me and she was like, Alexia, I can tell you really love this. Why would you minor? Why aren't you an econ major? And I stopped and I was like, well, it's too late. I'm already a junior. What do you mean? I only have 2 years left. How can I switch everything that I've been doing? And she just said, it's never too late to do what you're passionate about. The worst that happens is if you have to take a summer class. And so I could pinpoint that as the day that completely changed my college career and everything. So I credit all of that to Professor Foster, and I think it's the way that she gives confidence to students, and I think that just speaks to the impact that a good professor can have.
So what I love about that is both of you...
Put her up to that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you planted that, no. Well, what I love about what both of you said is you really were talking about igniting a fire, right? A passion, right? And you came to it in different ways. Maybe it was Bernanke and real-world case studies, and for you it was the power of a really great teacher. One of the things that strikes me as a challenge that I think economics educators have to work through, particularly as it relates to diverse students, is helping them to persist through that safety net course, for instance, that we're talking about, because they're sort of, if I were in their shoes, it's sort of okay, I've got to go through and I've got to go back to the basics before I could even do the quote unquote fun stuff. And so one of the things that I like about this learning assistant program that you've implemented is that you have peers, right, sort of helping students along the way. So I kind of want to delve into that a little bit. And I'm not sure if we made that clear. Both Alexia and McKenna are learning assistants. Actually, do you want to explain what that means and what you do? Sure.
So as learning assistants, we are in the classroom. I am in the 11:10 class, and McKenna's in the 12:45 class, so we're there twice a week. And while Professor Foster is doing lectures, she also has clicker questions, and she does examples, so we walk around the room, and I think there's about 80 students in each class. So we walk around, and people raise their hand and ask questions, and we go up and answer and see where students are struggling. And then, as I mentioned before, we host 2-hour a week study sessions on a different day of the week.
I think an important distinction that we found really made a difference with students showing up is we call them study hours instead of office hours, because I think there's kind of a stigma about office hours being really formal, and having study sessions, especially with undergrads, it makes the process a lot more informal, and I feel like it allows students to be much more vulnerable than they would be with like a professor in a more formal setting. So I think that's something really cool that we have.
So I think you, oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that the reason we need the learning assistants in the classroom is, remember, these students are really weak in math, and we don't allow them to use calculators in the class. So we see exactly what they don't know. So in micro, often we would have students saying, I don't know how you inverted that function. And all we would know is that the student didn't know how to invert the function. But in this class, we know exactly why they don't know how to invert the function. And that's been extremely helpful.
Thank you for that, yeah. I think I heard one of you mention that you spend 2 hours per week, right, with the students. So I guess what can you share with the educators in the room about some of the techniques to really reach today's learners? What are some of the insights that you're gleaning from those 2-hour sessions?
One thing in particular that I've noticed about the students that struggle more is that they're the students that are trying to memorize how to do each problem. And I think, especially with economics, memorizing how to approach equations is not going to help you, because you can think about problems in so many different aspects, in so many different lights, and you can tweak the problems. And if you don't understand why you're using the equations you're using or what variables you're using to solve the problem, then you're never going to come to a solution. So students that are trying to understand why you're using certain equations and why you're using certain graphs and variables are having a much easier time solving the problems. So a lot of the students that we're seeing in our class have a lot of issues approaching the problems, but they have the tools to solve them, they just don't know how to use them.
Yeah, and another thing, I think we've noticed a few obstacles, but one thing that I think is important is there's a rise in technology use nowadays in the classroom, and that can be really valuable as a student, but I think I've noticed, at least in economics, that you can't really take notes for an intro course in economics on a computer, because you can't draw graphs, and you can't divide fractions, and you can't multiply things and shift curves if you're working on a Word document. You need to have a pencil and paper. So when students come in to my study sessions, I always say, like, get out a piece of paper. You really can't do this on a keyboard. I think it's kind of a mental block. And I know, at least for all of my classes, recently, professors always start the first day of class saying, there's so much science behind why technology isn't good for taking notes. Like, you should be taking notes on paper. And I feel like students kind of just brush that aside, because it is easier to just have one computer device with you all the time instead of 7 notebooks. But I think bringing that back to basics in economics is extremely important. And another thing that I think impacts our generation is that we place a huge importance on instant gratification, and I think that comes from social media use and a lot of other factors. But in economics, I think when students see a problem and they expect to be able to do it right away, or to get it right away and to understand right away. And I think something they really struggle with is when they don't understand something, they'll just give up and they'll say, I can't do it, I just don't get it. So in my study session, I think something I try to work towards is a lot of just open encouragement and saying, like, it's okay if you don't get a problem. And I usually have about 20 to 30 students coming in. It's on Thursday night, so it's the night before the quiz the next day. So I think that's why we see a spike in attendance that day. But what I try to do is I basically lead it more as a discussion, but I see what they're all having trouble with, and then I do the problem out on the board, and then I say, all right, I'm going to make up a problem. So then I make up something using different numbers, different names, something that's relatable to them. Like, I'll say, like, work, study, job, or tutoring, or things like that. and then I'll pick on people and have them come up and solve the problem. And a lot of the times they either won't know how to do it and then we'll work through it, or they'll do it and then they won't explain how they got that, and so then I ask them to explain to the rest of the people there, how did you get that? Or I'll ask a question and I'll say, like, what is the opportunity cost of this? And they just say, like, 3 or something. And so then I say, how did you get 3? What does that mean? What is opportunity cost? Who can define it in their own words? So it's like repetition and going back, which I love because I have gotten really excited about teaching through this. So I think especially like learning all the different ways of teaching that we hear about at this conference, it's cool to be able to apply those in our study sessions, which are such a small, they're not like a real class or anything, but it's cool that at least we get to do something.
Well, your passion is evident. Well, and it struck me, I'm a huge sports fan, and essentially what you're describing in my mind is you're almost like a coach on the field or a coach on the court, right? Like the quarterback in football, right? So you're in there with the students and you're, telling them all the proper techniques and the proper strategies to approach solving economics challenges, which I just love. So I want to come back to you, Dr. Foster, around the role that you think GW is playing in sort of diversifying economics education.
Again, I just, let me
I know it's hard to see.
Yeah, I'll show you some information that I have. So I wanted to ask you all, who do you think is in my 1001 class? The kids who couldn't make it into Principles of Microeconomics. If you had to describe my class, who do you think would be in it? Anyone? So the class is the people who failed the math assessment. So these are all the students who are weak in math, so weak that we don't feel that they could go in and do Principles of Microeconomics.
So do you mean in terms of like
in terms of race, in terms of men, women, who do you think is in?
young women in front of you?
Minority groups.
So could I put a gender bias on there?
You could, okay.
There's a gender bias related to women
Mm-hmm.
and perhaps maybe underrepresented minority groups.
Okay. And all of you would be wrong. All of you would be wrong, and that surprised us. So that really surprised us because I thought there'd be more women in the class. I thought there would be more underrepresented minorities in the class. It is everybody. It's everybody who never studied in high school. It's all the smart kids who never studied in high school and got the grades, and now they're hitting a wall because they don't know how to study. It's everybody. It's in the class. It's really interesting. We also have the underrepresented minorities, but the class is very mixed. I also wanted to ask you who you think the underrepresented minorities who are coming in. So the first year we had the test optional. Faculty were very upset and they blamed the administration and said, why did they admit these people into college? These people aren't college material, they shouldn't be here, etc. And I wanted to show you who these people were. So some of the process by which we went test optional is carefully students were selected to come in without those test scores. So we have a Cisneros Hispanic Leadership Institute, and they carefully picked students who had done a lot of service in their communities or who were leaders in their communities. Same thing with the Posse Foundation, which is an organization out of Atlanta, and these are African American students who have done a lot of community service and who show great leadership potential. And then the other two groups are groups from Washington, D.C. that are just low-income groups. So you can see that these are exactly the kind of people that we want taking economics, people who have great leadership potential, people who are leaders, and we just need to get them over the hump of that mathematics or over the study skills, and that's what we tell them on the first day of class. So we set the expectation saying, we don't call it a remedial course, we call it just an introductory course, and we say, we expect you to be out there. You're going to be the governor of the Fed, or you're going to be the president of the United States, or something, and we want you to have the skill, this ability when you're out there. Because what we know is that even when people have the math, they don't have the intuition, and they don't sometimes get the economics, and so we know that some of those people in the class are going to go on to do great things. And so that immediately changes the tone. The other expectation I set in there is that for those of you for whom math has been difficult for a very long time, it may take more than one semester to learn this stuff. So please don't expect that this semester you're going to get an A and you're going to move on to micro. You may not. And I'm here as long as it takes. And if you have to take this class again next semester in order to get that solid foundation, we're here to help you. So we are just really cut and dry in that class. We tell them straight, and that seems to really help students a lot. We tell them we expect them to make mistakes. In fact, I deliberately make mistakes in that class on very simple math, and then I send them an email saying, oh, by the way, I made that mistake in class, and my TAs were right, or my LAs were right, and I was wrong, and no apologies, because in this class we all make mistakes. And that somehow sets the tone in the classroom, and it gets more comfortable. What we see now at GW, after going test optional and seeing the 30%, we've been able to bring it back to where it was before we went test optional, by having this two-stage testing where we do an online placement exam, and then when they come into the classroom, we do another in-class, no calculator, open response placement. And that has helped us a great deal. It has made micro and macro a pleasure to teach, because people are able to teach it at the level that they want. I wanted to mention that it's much more than just the math. It's a lot of different stuff, some of which McKenna and Alexia have alluded to. My own perspective on what happened at GW, going back to your question, is that we didn't do it successfully. GW had done everything about access, although they called it access and success. There was actually no plan for success. No one had thought about what is it going to take to get these students who are coming in from the Posse Foundation to actually succeed in the classroom. And we saw those kids just come in, and it was a disaster for a semester. And so I think it's the same thing with the American Economics Association. I hear over and over and over, we need more women, we need more diverse people in the profession, but I see no concrete action. There's no actual detailed thought about what is it going to take to actually make that happen. For example, when we meet for our big conferences, why is there no diversity training for economics faculty? And it has to be specific to faculty teaching economics, or training on if there are transgender students in the classroom, how do we address them? This kind of training, if we don't do it, we're not going to see the students in economics. It's not just principles. And then we don't track them. There's no tracking. I loved what Marcy said about assessment. She talked about it. We do it at the classroom level, where we're tracking the students week by week, and we're collecting assessment data week by week. It is evidence-based, and that's what we're looking at. I wanted to show you some data on the econ department before we went test optional, after we went test optional. And by the way, the last bar on there is completely wrong. That's wrong data from the university. I was able to tell them that. You can see nothing has changed. It's always been 35%, or around maximum 35% women, and the rest are all men going into the economics major. These are just the guys who declare it. So we don't even have the data on who's actually graduating with an economics major, which is probably a much different ratio than this. And as I said, that last number is different. So going test optional didn't do anything to our numbers in terms of the number of women who are saying they want to be econ majors. Here's declared economics majors by race. No change, absolutely none. It is absolutely flat across every year we've collected the data. And in fact, if you look at number of African Americans declaring that they want to go into majors, that number has actually declined. And so we're not seeing anything. So just opening it up and offering the access doesn't do anything to numbers of people who are coming in. We think it requires a lot of tracking. One of the things that we're now starting to see as a department is, if we actually want to see people declaring or graduating with economics as a major, we have to do something called program assessment, where we have to track all the classes and see where are we seeing the drop, where are we losing them. We know they're all there in the principal's class. What happens after the principal's class? We need to track them to see what happens between principals and intermediate. And then what happens after that? Where exactly are we losing them? And that kind of data we're now thinking about starting to collect. So we are getting an IRB for the department so that we can start tracking some of that data.
So, Dr. Foster, you mentioned one of the things that you encountered when rolling out this program was criticism from other faculty, right, around, oh my gosh, these students aren't prepared. What advice do you have for the educators in the room who might want to embark on sort of this path of creating a movement, if you will, within their own departments? What advice for small changes, whether it's diversity training or a safety net course? What advice do you have for the educators?
I'll say it's really tough. We first had to fight our own department, and we had a lot of colleagues just in the economics department itself that didn't understand why these students were our responsibility. And it's the admissions office that admitted them, and why are we responsible? Aren't we just hand-holding, et cetera, et cetera? My thought about this is, but these are our students, and therefore we're responsible for them. If they're in my class, I'm responsible for them. The way we were able to get traction on it was by talking to other faculty in other STEM departments. If you're trying to do this as a department on your own, it's probably not going to work. So my closest allies were people just like me teaching the principal's classes in chemistry, physics, biology, mathematics, and we had joint sessions where we presented this kind of data to each other, and then we decided we really had a big problem, and as a group we went to the provost's office and said, you need to start doing the ALEX placement exam. And so then they started, set up the ALEX placement exam. But unless a group of departments, faculty from a number of departments does it together, and your closest allies are going to be in the other STEM departments, then I found that we had a lot of traction that way. And the other thing that really works is collecting the data, because nobody's going to believe anything that you say without the data. And so the fact that we had been collecting data for years and were able to show the changes really made a huge difference. And then they were willing to give us resources, funding for hiring new faculty, et cetera.
Okay, that was great. So I have a couple more questions, and then we're going to open it up to you all. So I'm sort of calling this our rapid fire section. So you mentioned the data, Dr. Foster, and you've been collecting this for some time. How do you intend to tweak the course, or really the curriculum, moving forward?
We collect, so one of the nice things about the class, and somebody mentioned it when they were speaking, I'm sorry, I can't remember who exactly it was, but tracking the class to see whether students are actually learning what they're learning. I mean, Betsy said it, I think, this morning about how important the subject is. It is so important. How is somebody, this young person, going to go out and make a sensible decision to go and vote if they don't even understand how the economy works, if a politician is telling a lie or not? It is such an important subject. It is so important for us to teach this foundational material and to teach it well. It's really time for us to rethink what we're teaching in micro and macro. When I teach micro, I find I'm flying through it. I'm flying through it. And we're covering a topic a week, a topic a week, a topic a week. That just doesn't make sense. Maybe we want to cover less content and go deeper. Maybe we want to cover topics like Madhavi just spoke about this afternoon, which I think is so current, so relevant, and that's what these young people want to hear in the classroom. That's what they're concerned about. And we can tie it to what they're interested in if we just talk about the things that are relevant to them and maybe completely rethink the content that we are saying should be in a Principles of Micro class or Principles of Macro class. I think it's time for the profession to do a little rethinking.
Thank you for that. So I want to close out with you, McKenna, and you, Alexia. I'm curious. You know, we started the conversation talking about this Principles of Mathematics Safety Net course, and you know how it's really built on improving confidence and study skills, obviously math skills. What's next? What else can we do to engage this generation? How else can we reach today's students? I know it's a tough question.
Well, I think everything we've heard today, like making things more relevant, making things about the world, I feel like we are in a generation of people who want to make change and who are very active. Especially our campus is extremely politically active. There's always a lot of things going on, especially living in DC. I feel like a lot of students come here because they want to make some sort of a difference, and I'm sure that's true in any college that you go to. A lot of economics people, I think we need to foster a sense of motivation and like inspiring students. Like, you can use economics as a tool to do things in the real world. It's not just solving math problems and shifting curves. Like, this is actually relevant material, and this is how you go out there and you have a job and a role, and you can teach people and reach people and expand to more people if you know how everything connects and how everything is intertwined. And especially with the world we live in today where everything is so closely intertwined, I feel like this is even more valuable of a subject to be figuring out how to connect topics and how to teach things in relevant ways that get students excited and get them to say, like, oh, I can use that to do that.
Thank you. McKenna?
Yeah, I would agree with everything Alexia said, and I would also add connecting economics to other subjects, which I think someone else mentioned earlier today, is really important, like especially sustainability and moving forward with that. International affairs, I know, especially spoke to me connecting economics with IA. So I think tying economics to the real world, tying economics to other subjects that students are interested in will really help increase people's interest in the major and help underrepresented minorities further their study of economics in the future. So
It might be a really good idea for the AEA's Economic Education Committee to get a group of young students together and ask them what should be the curriculum.
Yeah, and clap for that.